Recognized Starseed of Gaia. Listen, the UAP disclosure that reached the public record on July 10th was not a political event. It was a field event, and the Arcturian Protocol keepers have already mapped exactly what it means for those who carried this truth alone for decades. I am Auriela, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian Protocol keepers. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. They have been watching this timeline marker approach for longer than you have been waiting for it. And they asked me to reach you now, not after you processed the news, not after the noise settled, now while the vindication is still live in your body. You did not scroll to this by accident. Your soul called this in long before you opened the screen. Something inside you has been waiting, not just to be believed, but to understand why the knowing came first, and why the confirmation took this long to arrive in the visible world. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening to you now, why your field has shifted since the disclosure landed, and what the Arcturian Protocol keepers already know about this phase. But here is the first revelation. What you experienced as ridicule was not a social failure. It was a containment pattern, a field condition the Council identifies as isolated signal carry, in which a starseed holds verified intelligence before the collective timeline is ready to receive it. You were not wrong early. You were positioned early. That is a different thing entirely. The collapse you carried in silence, the years of being dismissed, minimized, and made to feel unstable for knowing what you knew, that has already been recognized by Arcturian intelligence. This is not just a message, it is a point of recognition. What happened to you has already been seen, and the field is already responding. Like this transmission to mark that the vindication has landed in your field. Comment 999 if you carried this truth while others called it delusion. Subscribe to Arcturian Council messages if you are ready to understand what the disclosure means beyond the headlines. Share this with someone who has been waiting longer than they can explain. You are not here by accident. You were guided here because the signal is already active. What happened to you was not confusion, it was compression. For years, possibly decades, you carried a frequency that the field around you could not yet process, and that compression left marks, not metaphorical ones, real ones, in your nervous system, in the particular tension that lived between your shoulder blades every time a conversation moved too close to what you actually knew. In the fractional pause you learned to insert before speaking, that practiced, almost unconscious delay where you would check yourself, measure the room, calculate the cost, in your relationships, in the ones that quietly thinned over time because the distance between what you knew and what was permissible to say became too wide to sustain genuine closeness. In the practiced, exhausted habit of knowing something and saying nothing because the cost of saying it was always too high and you had already paid that cost enough times to understand exactly how the transaction ended. That compression was not weakness. It was not spiritual failure. It was the field-intelligent response of a carrier who understood, through hard-won experience, that the environment could not yet receive the signal. You did not silence yourself because you doubted the truth. You silenced yourself because you were protecting it, holding it intact, holding it steady in a field that would have fractured it or buried it beneath ridicule if you had released it too early. That is not a small thing. The Arcturian Protocol. Keepers do not observe that kind of endurance casually. They map it. They record the threshold pressure each carrier sustained. And they know precisely how long you held before the timeline was ready to catch up with what you already understood. And then July 10th arrived, and something in your body responded before your mind had even finished reading the headline. That response was not excitement. It was not simple vindication. It was something older and more precise, a frequency unlocking that the Arcturian Protocol keepers identify as a containment release. The signal you had been holding under pressure, under ridicule, under your own learned self-doubt, suddenly found external confirmation. And when a compressed signal finds confirmation, it does not simply relax. It expands. It reorganizes the field it has been living inside. It begins to interact with every structure in your life that was built around the compression, and some of those structures cannot survive that interaction intact. Think of what happens when a beam that has been bearing extraordinary weight for years is suddenly relieved of that load. The beam does not simply straighten, it trembles, it adjusts. The surrounding structures that had bent to accommodate the pressure begin to shift back, and that shifting is not smooth. It is the visible evidence of a correction that was always going to happen once the weight was removed. This is why your life may feel strange right now. This is why something has shifted in ways you cannot fully name. Not discomfort in the ordinary sense, but a quality of internal displacement, as if your own interior geography has been rearranged overnight, and you are still learning where everything now sits. This is not a side effect of reading the news. This is a field event, and the Arcturian protocol keepers have already mapped exactly what this phase produces in carriers like you. Let me tell you what is actually happening beneath the surface of the disclosure moment. Because the headlines are only the visible edge, what matters for you, specifically for you, who carried this before it was safe to carry it, is what is now moving inside the invisible architecture of your field. The headlines will be processed, debated, dismissed by some, amplified by others. That is the surface layer, the collective response to information entering the record. But you are not processing information. You are processing the end of isolation. And those are structurally different events that produce structurally different responses in the field. The first thing you need to understand is that isolated signal carry does not simply end when the isolation ends. The body does not release decades of compression the moment confirmation arrives. Instead, it enters what the Council identifies as a realignment sequence, a process in which the field begins to shed the survival structures it built around the original knowing. The guardedness, the preemptive self-minimization, the internal translator that learned to convert your real perception into socially acceptable language. These structures are not bad. They kept you functioning. They allowed you to maintain relationships, hold employment, move through a world that was not yet calibrated to receive you at full frequency. They were adaptive. They were intelligent in the way that all protective formations are intelligent. They arose to serve a real and pressing need, but they were built for a frequency environment that no longer exists, and a field in realignment will begin to dissolve them whether you consciously choose that dissolution or not. This is why some of you have been feeling an unexpected disorientation since the disclosure landed. Not grief exactly, not joy. Something harder to name, a loosening, a structural instability, a sense that the floor you were standing on has shifted by several degrees and the furniture has not moved, but nothing is quite where your body expects it to be. You reach for certainties that were reliable last month and find them slightly out of position. You reach for your sense of self and find it in revision. That is not emotional dysfunction. That is field realignment in its early stage. The architecture of your old containment strategy is beginning to fail because the condition it was built to manage is no longer present. The pressure has changed, and every structure that was shaped by that pressure is now being reshaped by its absence. The second thing you need to understand is what the Arcturian protocol keepers call the reversal of evidence. For years, your reality was structured around a painful asymmetry. You knew something, but the external world provided no confirmation. This asymmetry creates a specific kind of internal pressure, the pressure of holding a signal that has nowhere to go, a signal that returns to you again and again with no external receiver, no reflection, no echo from the world around you. You adapted to that pressure. You organized your inner life around the absence of confirmation. You built coping architectures so elaborate, so deeply embedded, that they began to feel like personality rather than strategy. The hypervigilance that reads every conversation for the moment it might turn dismissive. The preemptive retreat from sharing what you perceive. The careful calibration of how much of yourself to reveal and in what sequence so that you might minimize the damage when the rejection inevitably came. And now that the confirmation has arrived, your field must recalibrate, not just the knowing, but the entire survival strategy you built around knowing without proof. This is more disruptive than it sounds, because the strategy was not only internal, it shaped how you present yourself in every room you enter, how much you trust your own perception when it arrives clearly and suddenly, the way true knowing always does. How quickly you second-guess a clear recognition that has no external support yet. how long you wait before speaking what you already understand, rehearsing the counterarguments before you have even finished forming the thought. The reversal of evidence does not simply hand you relief. It surfaces everything that was built to manage the absence of that relief. And confronting those structures, recognizing them, releasing them, understanding why they formed and how long they have been operating beneath your awareness, is the actual work of this phase. Some of you have been feeling it as a strange loss of confidence, even in the moment of being proven right. As if the vindication arrived, but the part of you that was supposed to receive it is still braced for dismissal, still holding the breath it has been holding for years, still waiting for the ground to open, as if the confirmation landed in the external world, but the internal world has not yet received the signal that the emergency is over. This is not a malfunction. This is the field catching up with what the timeline just changed. The nervous system encodes the conditions it has lived inside for long enough. Changing the external conditions does not immediately reprogram the encoding. That is a slower process, and it is the process you are now in. The Council is watching this carefully in carriers like you because this is precisely the threshold where the most important repositioning becomes possible. And also the threshold where carriers most often misread their own experience as breakdown rather than breakthrough. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. The disorientation, the strange loosening, the sense that the confirmation arrived but something in you is still catching up. This is not confusion. This is the moment your Arcturian origin begins to surface at a frequency the field can finally sustain. You have spent years carrying a signal that the world could not yet verify. But the Council does not only want you to be vindicated, it wants you to understand what you are. If this transmission is putting language around something you have carried in silence for longer than you can measure, the Arcturian recalibration blueprint was created for exactly this threshold. It is not another layer of explanation. It is a structure decoder built to help you read and activate the Arcturian strand you have always carried. The origin the protocol keepers have already confirmed is present in you. The link is in the first pinned comment. It will not remain there indefinitely. This access point is open now because the field is ready. So are you. There is a third layer of what is happening that most carriers will not recognize without guidance. The Arcturian protocol, keepers identify it as timeline pressure surfacing. When a major field event like the disclosure occurs, it does not affect all timelines equally. It creates a branching moment, a point at which the trajectory available to a starseed carrier diverges sharply from the trajectory available to those who did not carry the signal. Those who never held this knowing before the confirmation simply receive information. They update a belief. They absorb new data. They move through the disclosure as they would move through any significant news cycle, with interest, perhaps with curiosity, but without the structural disruption that comes when a signal you have been holding in isolation suddenly finds its external match. But those who held it receive something structurally different, a choice point, a moment in which the field recognizes their readiness for the next frequency and begins to make the old frequency incompatibly. This incompatibility is not gentle. It does not announce itself clearly. It arrives as a quality of wrongness attached to things that were recently right, as a hollowness inside routines that once carried meaning, as a subtle but persistent sense that you are slightly too large for the life you have been living, not in arrogance, but in the way a growing form becomes too large for a container that was the right size before the growth began. This is why relationships, habits, self-definitions, and life structures that felt stable even a few weeks ago may now feel suddenly insufficient. Not broken, not wrong, insufficient, as if they were built for a version of you that is no longer the most accurate version. The old frequency structure is not collapsing because something went wrong. It is collapsing because something went right, because the field has recognized that you can now sustain the next architecture, and the old one must give way to make room. If you are experiencing sudden distance from people you have known for years without any obvious conflict or cause, if conversations that used to sustain you now feel thin, if the company that once grounded you now leaves you feeling more alone than if you had stayed in silence, this is what is happening. If you are experiencing a quiet withdrawal from environments, conversations, or roles that used to feel normal, If you find yourself declining what once attracted you without being able to articulate why, this is what is happening. If you are experiencing a strange sense of incompleteness, even in the moments that should feel most vindicating, if the news that should have brought relief instead brought a restlessness you cannot locate or name, this is what is happening. This is not sadness, it is not ingratitude. It is timeline pressure surfacing. The field beginning to make the incompatibilities visible so that the carrier can consciously navigate the transition rather than being moved through it without understanding. The fourth recognition is one that the Council calls the return of suppressed certainty. For every year you spent second-guessing your own perception because the world told you to, for every time you walked away from a conversation having surrendered your knowing to someone else's louder certainty, a layer of suppression formed over the original signal, not erasure. The signal was never erased, it was compressed, pushed below the threshold of comfortable access, held in a region of your awareness where you could sense it, but not quite reach it, could almost hear it, but not quite speak it. These layers are not permanent, but they do not dissolve all at once. They dissolve in sequence, and each layer that releases can feel like a sudden surge of either clarity or anxiety, sometimes both simultaneously, arriving in the same moment as different currents in the same water. You may suddenly find yourself knowing something with a conviction that startles you, a perception arriving with a solidity and certainty that you had almost forgotten was available to you. Or you may find yourself flooded by old memories of specific moments when you were dismissed, minimized, or made to feel unstable. The conversation in which someone you trusted looked at you with something between concern and condescension and told you that you were reading too much into things. The moment you chose, for the last time in a long season, to keep the signal to yourself. These memories arriving now are not evidence that you are stuck in the past. They are the field surfacing what was suppressed so that it can be seen clearly, recognized for what it was, and finally released rather than carried forward. This flooding is not regression. It is the field completing a circuit, allowing the suppressed certainties to re-enter your awareness now that the external environment can finally support their weight. Do not interpret this re-emergence as proof that you are still damaged by the past. Interpret it as evidence that the field is running a diagnostic on every suppressed signal, and clearing the ones that no longer need to remain dormant. The Arcturian Protocol. Keepers call this phase a frequency audit, a systematic review of everything the carrier compressed during the years of isolated signal carry. It is methodical. It surfaces one layer, completes its clearing, and moves to the next. It does not skip what needs to be seen. It does not hurry past what needs to be felt. The audit is not random. It is precise. And it only occurs when the field has determined that the carrier is ready for the restoration of their full frequency range, that the container is now stable enough to hold what was previously too volatile to surface. The fifth recognition is the most important one for where you are right now. In this exact window following the disclosure, the Council identifies it as the activation threshold, the point at which a starseed carrier transitions from holding a signal to embodying it. This distinction matters more than it might initially appear. Holding is passive. Embodying is structural. When you held the signal, it lived in you like a contained truth, something you knew but could not fully live inside of because the field around you was not compatible with it. You held it the way a person holds a document they cannot yet act on, carefully, protectively, keeping it intact against the day when circumstances will allow it to be used. Embodying means that the signal becomes the organizing principle of how you move, speak, decide, and perceive. It means the knowing is no longer something you carry alongside your life, a secret passenger in an otherwise ordinary vehicle. It becomes the center from which your life is organized, the axis around which everything else arranges itself. The activation threshold is not crossed all at once. It is approached through exactly the process you are currently in. The realignment, the reversal of evidence, the timeline pressure, the return of suppressed certainty. Each of these is not simply a phase to survive. Each of them is a preparation for the moment when the embodiment becomes stable. They are the threshold's conditions, the field's way of verifying that the carrier is structurally ready before the signal is allowed to move from carried to embodied. The disclosure was not the activation. It was the external condition that made the activation possible. The door opened, but you are the one who has to walk through it. And the threshold is exactly where you are standing right now. Some of you will feel a strange resistance at this point. A part of you that has been waiting for this confirmation for so long that it does not quite trust it has actually arrived. A part of you that keeps scanning the periphery, waiting for the dismissal to follow the vindication, because that has been the pattern for long enough that your field encoded it as inevitable. The Council recognizes this response not as weakness, but as one of the most profound marks of what you endured. You were not only dismissed, you were trained through repetition to anticipate dismissal as the inevitable response to your signal. Every time you spoke and were met with skepticism, every time you reached for connection around what you knew and found only distance, the training deepened. That training does not dissolve the moment the evidence arrives. It has to be consciously identified, seen clearly for what it is, which is a learned adaptation to conditions that no longer exist, and released with the same deliberateness with which it was formed. This is the final and most precise diagnosis this transmission was built to deliver. The disclosure changed the external record. It moved truth from the margins to the documented center, but it did not automatically change the internal architecture you built to survive the years before the record changed. That architecture is now in process, loosening, surfacing, beginning to fail in the ways that will eventually free you. But you cannot navigate this transition on autopilot. You cannot allow it to happen without understanding what is happening, because a transition navigated without understanding looks identical, from the inside, to ordinary collapse. And if you mistake this repositioning for collapse, you will attempt to stabilize what was meant to fall. You will rebuild what the field is trying to dissolve. You will interrupt the very process that is moving you toward the frequency you have always been meant to sustain. The Arcturian Protocol Keepers did not guide you to this transmission so that you would feel briefly validated and then return to the same compressed frequency you have been living in. They guided you here because this is the window, the specific, narrow, time-sensitive window in which the transition from carrying to embodying becomes possible. Windows close, not as punishment, not as arbitrary limitation, but because the field conditions that make a particular transition possible are not permanent. They open when the external environment reaches the threshold required to support the shift, and they remain open for exactly as long as the carrier needs to move through them, provided the carrier moves with intention and understanding rather than waiting in confusion for the process to resolve itself without their participation. What has been happening to you is not a sign that you are behind. It is not punishment for having known too early. It is not the residue of personal failure or the evidence of a life that went sideways. It is the visible surface of a repositioning that the Arcturian field already completed before you had words for it. The signal was always real. Your perception was always accurate. The confirmation that arrived on July 10th was not proof that you were right. It was the external echo of a truth your field recognized before the timeline was ready to display it. The visible world simply caught up. You were already there. You were not wrong. You were early, and the field has already begun the correction that transforms that early positioning into the most important advantage available to you right now. Say this aloud if it is true for you. What I carried was real, and I am ready to stop carrying it as a secret. The process is already in motion. The only question that remains is whether you will navigate it with the clarity of someone who understands what they are, or whether you will mistake the repositioning for ordinary chaos and wait out the window without moving through it. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Council messages. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion. And this is only the beginning.